exploring the history of America. Greetings, everyone. Let's embark on an exciting adventure through the story of the United States of America. This lesson is designed to enhance your listening and speaking skills, and I'll keep it simple, engaging, and captivating. By the end of this journey, you'll understand America's origins, its challenges, its diverse people, and why it stands as a global powerhouse today. Let's begin with the key question: how did America come to be? Thousands of years ago, around 15,000 years back, Native American tribes were the first inhabitants of this land. They were the original stewards of America, living as hunters and gatherers who crossed a land bridge from Asia to North America. They thrived in balance with nature, cultivating crops, hunting game, and creating vibrant cultures. However, the America we know today began taking shape much later. In 1492, an Italian explorer, Christopher Columbus, set sail to find a new path to Asia. Instead, he stumbled upon the Americas. His voyage was supported by Spain's monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. Mistaking the land for India, he called the native inhabitants Indians. Interestingly, Columbus wasn't the first European to reach these shores. About 500 years earlier, Viking explorers, led by Leif Erikson, landed in what is now Canada. Their settlements, however, were short-lived. Columbus is often credited with discovering America because his journey sparked widespread European interest in the continent. The European Surge. Following Columbus, waves of explorers from Europe arrived. Spain, France, England, and others sent ships to claim territories in the New World. Spain targeted South and Central America, drawn by gold and silver. Meanwhile, England and France established settlements in North America. These European newcomers transformed the land and its people. They introduced new crops, animals, and tools, but also brought devastating diseases that decimated Native American populations. This marked the start of a complicated and often tragic relationship between settlers and indigenous peoples. The earliest settlements. In 1607, England founded its first lasting colony, Jamestown, in Virginia. The settlers endured brutal winters, illness, and food shortages but persevered. More colonies soon emerged, attracting Europeans seeking better lives. Among the most notable settlers were the Pilgrims, who arrived in 1620 aboard the Mayflower. Fleeing religious oppression in England, they sought freedom to practice their faith. Landing in present-day Massachusetts, they celebrated the first Thanksgiving with Native Americans who aided their survival. Why America mattered. By the 1700s, America was a beacon of opportunity. People flocked from Europe, drawn by the promise of freedom, land, and a fresh start. However, this came with conflicts, as England, France, and Spain vied for control of the continent. By this time, 13 colonies lined the eastern coast of what would become the United States, grouped into 3 regions. New England colonies, e.g., Massachusetts, Connecticut, known for forests, fishing, and small farms. These communities emphasized teamwork. Middle colonies, e.g., New York, Pennsylvania, nicknamed the bread basket for their abundant wheat and grain, they were home to diverse cultures and religions. Southern colonies, e.g., Virginia, Georgia, these relied on large plantations growing crops like tobacco, rice, and cotton, worked by enslaved Africans, a dark and cruel chapter in America's story. Colonial life. Life in the colonies was tough. Settlers built homes, grew food, and braved harsh winters. Families toiled together, with children often helping on farms. Education was scarce, with few children learning to read or write. Yet, the colonies were filled with hope. People came seeking religious freedom, land, and opportunities unavailable in Europe. Some colonies, like Pennsylvania, were founded as havens for religious diversity. Tensions with Britain. Though located in America, the colonies remained under British rule. King George III imposed laws and heavy taxes, which frustrated colonists who had no voice in the British government. They coined the phrase, "no taxation without representation," demanding a say in the laws they followed. A notable act of defiance was the Boston Tea Party in 1773, when colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships and dumped tea into the harbor to protest a tea tax. The path to freedom. By the mid-1700s, colonists grew weary of British control. They yearned to govern themselves. In 1775, the American Revolution began, pitting the colonies against Britain. Led by figures like George Washington, who commanded the American forces, and Thomas Jefferson, who penned the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the colonists boldly declared their freedom from Britain on July 4th. The Declaration emphasized the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was a daring move, as Britain was a global superpower. The American colonists, mostly farmers and ordinary citizens, faced a formidable, well-equipped British army. Yet, their passion for freedom drove them forward. With aid from France, including troops and ships, the colonists won a decisive victory at Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. In 1783, Britain formally recognized the United States as an independent nation. The birth of a nation. Post-war, the new nation's leaders crafted the Constitution, outlining the country's governing principles. In 1789, George Washington became the first president. The United States was founded on ideals of freedom, equality, and democracy, though these didn't yet extend to enslaved people, women, or Native Americans, a contradiction that would spark future struggles. America's growth. After independence, the U.S. was a small nation of 13 states along the East Coast. Ambitious to expand, it achieved a milestone in 1803 when President Thomas Jefferson secured the Louisiana Purchase from France, doubling the country's size. This vast territory, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, opened new prospects for farming and exploration. Jefferson sent explorers Lewis and Clark, guided by Native American Sacagawea, to map this territory and connect with indigenous tribes. Westward expansion. The notion of manifest destiny fueled westward movement, with Americans believing it was their fate to span the continent. Families journeyed in wagon trains, braving harsh weather and rugged landscapes. However, this expansion displaced Native American tribes, who were forced onto reservations, leading to conflicts and profound losses. The growth of slavery. As the U.S. expanded, its economy flourished, particularly in the South, where plantations grew cotton and tobacco. Tragically, this wealth relied on enslaved Africans, forcibly brought to America and subjected to brutal conditions. Slavery stripped people of their rights, tore families apart, and fueled a moral crisis. A nation divided. By the mid-1800s, the U.S. split into two opposing regions. The North opposed slavery, relying on factories and small farms, while the South depended on enslaved labor for its plantation economy. This divide deepened, making the nation feel like two separate entities. Abolitionists like Harriet Tubman, who led enslaved people to freedom via the Underground Railroad, and Frederick Douglass, a former slave whose writings exposed slavery's horrors, fought tirelessly. Harriet Beecher's By 1861, tensions erupted into the Civil War when Southern states formed the Confederacy, seeking to preserve slavery. The conflict also centered on whether the U.S. would remain one nation. President Abraham Lincoln, leading the North, aimed to preserve the Union and end slavery. The war, 1861 to 1865, was devastating, with bloody battles and widespread destruction. In 1863, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freed enslaved people in Confederate states, marking a turning point. The North's victory in 1865, followed by the 13th Amendment, abolished slavery nationwide, though equality remained elusive. Reconstruction and beyond. Post-war Reconstruction aimed to rebuild the nation and integrate freed African Americans. The 14th and 15th Amendments granted citizenship and voting rights to African American men. However, racist Jim Crow laws enforced segregation, hindering progress. The Industrial Revolution. In the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution transformed America. Factories and machines reshaped work and life. Electricity, Thomas Edison's innovations brought power to homes and industries. Telephone, Alexander Graham Bell's invention revolutionized communication. Railroads, these connected the nation, boosting trade and travel. While these advancements created jobs, workers faced long hours and unsafe conditions, often for meager wages. Immigration and expansion. Millions of immigrants from Europe, Asia, and beyond arrived in the late 1800s and early 1900s, entering through places like Ellis Island. They built railroads, worked in factories, and enriched America's culture, though many faced discrimination. The Homestead Act spurred westward settlement, but Native Americans suffered, losing land to reservations. Battles like Little Bighorn highlighted their resistance. America as a global power. By the 1900s, America's wealth and military strength grew. The Spanish-American War of 1898 expanded U.S. influence, gaining territories like Puerto Rico. Workers' unions, led by figures like Eugene V. Debs, fought for better conditions, spurred by tragedies like the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. The fight for equality. African American leaders like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois pushed for progress, laying groundwork for the civil rights movement. World War I, 1914 to 1918, saw America's global influence grow, with President Woodrow Wilson advocating for peace through the League of Nations. The Roaring Twenties. The 1920s brought prosperity, jazz, and women's voting rights via the 19th Amendment. However, the Great Migration saw African Americans move north, still facing racism. The Great Depression. The 1929 stock market crash triggered the Great Depression, causing widespread unemployment and poverty. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs, including job creation and Social Security, helped recovery, with his fireside chats inspiring hope. World War II. America entered World War II after Japan's 1941 Pearl Harbor attack. The home front rallied, with women like Rosie the Riveter filling factory roles. Key victories, like D-Day in 1944 and the atomic bombs on Japan in 1945, ended the war, cementing America's global dominance. The Cold War. Post-war, the U.S. and Soviet Union engaged in the Cold War, a rivalry of ideologies. Space race, the U.S. landed on the moon in 1969. Cuban Missile Crisis, a 1962 standoff was resolved peacefully. Berlin Wall, a symbol of division until its fall in 1989. The Civil Rights Movement. The 1950s and 60s saw African Americans, led by Martin Luther King Jr., fight for equality. Key moments included the 1954 Brown versus Board decision, the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott, and the 1963 March on Washington. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 marked progress. Modern America. By the 1970s and 80s, America led in technology, culture, and military power. Its diverse population, strong economy, and global influence through Hollywood, music, and fast food solidified its status. Challenges today. America faces issues like racism, income inequality, costly healthcare, environmental concerns, and political divides, yet it remains a leader in innovation and education. America's future. With passionate young leaders, advancements in AI and space, and a celebration of diversity, America's future is bright. Its story of resilience, innovation, and hope continues to inspire, proving that with determination, anything is possible.